Today, we will be getting a presentation from our partners over at MRS on disability awareness. The presentation is up here on the screen right now. Just a few housekeeping items before I hand things over to them to get started. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to leave them in the chat. We will be addressing questions at the very end. We ask that you keep your microphones on mute throughout the presentation just to eliminate any potential background noise, but please feel free to leave your cameras on so we can see your faces. And then finally, the session is being recorded and it will be posted on our Learn site later on. So if you missed a portion of it, or if you wanted to share it with another staff member who wasn't able to attend, you can find it there later this week. And that is pretty much it for housekeeping items. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Craig Saunders and Charlene Organ, and we will get started. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, Tom. Thank you for coming today to watch our presentation on disability etiquette and changing the perception of disability. I'm going to go ahead and let Charlene introduce herself before we dive into the presentation. And I'll introduce myself after you. You're on mute, Charlene.
Everybody, that has to happen to at least one person. So luckily it happened to me. So yes, thank you everybody for being here. I'm Charlene. I'm a consultant here in the Grand Rapids region and helping Craig cover the UP territory for the business network division here. So thank you so much for having me and us.
Thank you, Charlene. And yes, many of you may have known Trina Rokula, who had left our agency a while back, and we've been covering the UP since then. So we're here to help. Again, my name is Craig Saunders. I'm a consultant primarily out of Northern Michigan, 21 counties in Northern Michigan. But again, working with the UP staff as well and our UP business customers primarily. So let's go ahead and dive into the presentation. Talk a little bit first about why we are here. Why would we get everybody together today? We're hoping to impart a little bit of knowledge to our audience today about the subject of disability. We're hoping to help people feel more comfortable about interacting with persons with disability, and maybe even help provide some more effective information, more effective things to help you with your interactions. So we're going to talk a little bit about perceptions of persons with disabilities and what our feelings and perceptions, what our thoughts might be about disability. We're also going to talk about the legal definition of disability, as well as a couple different types of disabilities, kind of a brief overview of the other different types of disabilities. We're going to be looking for some feedback and some interaction from our attendees today. So be prepared to respond to some questions. But overall, our end goal for today is to help provide some further insight into the subject of disability, including things like myths and misperceptions along the way. And when we finish the presentation today, Charlene will be talking about the subject of reasonable accommodations too. It's just a good subject to end on to give some information to our attendees about how they work and how they affect work. Let's go to the next slide, please, Gary. Forgot to mention, we've got Gary Hollick in the background running our slides, and we'll be checking in with the chat if there's any questions as we go through. Somebody just joined, please hit your mute. Thank you. So we've got a picture up on the screen, and I want to ask the attendees to interact at this point. Let me know what you see. What do you see in this picture? Go ahead and open up your chat and tell me what you see. All right, I see man on a saxophone, a keychain, person playing an instrument, guy playing a saxophone, organs. I like it. I got some different responses. Guy playing sax, someone playing a saxophone. All right. Thank you for your responses. Woman's face, there's the one I was looking for. Thank you, Amy. Typically, when we ask this question, there's two answers. Typically, it's either a man playing a saxophone or a woman's face. So there is no right or wrong answer to this question. It's based on your perceptions and what you see. So as soon as I pointed out, that the two typical responses were a woman's face or a man playing a saxophone, you're probably able to see both now. So why is that? You might be asking yourself that. Why can I see them both now? Well, it's perception. A little bit of knowledge has allowed you to change your perception over time. So just as our perceptions may differ, we may all perceive disability a little different. So now I'm going to ask you a few questions related to the subject of disability. And you don't need to provide any answers. Just I want you to think about it as we go through these questions. So go ahead and move to the next slide. First question, what is your picture of a disability? Now, what word comes to mind when you hear the word disability or see the word disability? So oftentimes when we do this training, we get a lot of responses related to you see a physical disability. You see someone using a wheelchair, something visual. Perhaps you might think of someone with a disability who may not be able to perform certain jobs or may not be able to do certain things. Better yet, you might imagine, the things a person can do, which is great. As opposed to the disability, you might think about the ability, but oftentimes many people will think of things people can't do. Which leads me to my next question. What have you been told you could not do? Go ahead and click that mouse. Thank you. Oftentimes we get that question, or someone tells us we can't do something. I know often I've got 2 teenage daughters that tell me I shouldn't play hockey anymore. Still do, but every morning I wake up after a game, I feel it. Maybe they're right, but I still do it. So most of us, maybe not all, but we've probably gotten that at some point in our lives that you shouldn't do this or you can't do this. So these are assumptions that somebody else has based on their perception, based on their biases, and they're from others. They're based on fear, or they're based on assumptions and biases that they may have about you that may not necessarily be true. And oftentimes that's a barrier that affects people with disabilities. And to illustrate that, I want to show you the final question on this slide. And it is, how many more times does a person with a disability have to interview to obtain a job compared to an individual without a disability? And when we think about it, people may think, 2 times more, maybe 4 times more, 5 times more. But the actual answer to that question is 10 times more. So it's kind of surprising, I know. Let's move on to the next slide, please. And we're going to talk a little bit about disability and its impact. So it impacts all of us. In the United States, the average is 1 in 4 persons will have some type of disability in their lifetime. In Michigan, it's actually a little higher, 1 in 3. Why that is, I don't know. It's just a little higher here, according to statistics from 2020. If we look at the stats on the bottom right of this slide, they're from 2020. We have 29% of workers with a disability employed part-time versus those without a disability was 16%. So you can see there's a much higher percentage of persons with a disability who are dealing with, who are only working part-time. We look at the other stat, 17.9% of persons with a disability were employed in 2020. That was down from 19.3%. Doesn't seem like a big change in percentage, but when you look at the population of Michigan being almost 10 million people, it's pretty substantial. As you can see, there's quite a substantial difference in employment numbers when we're looking at persons with a disability versus those without. So, next slide, please. Let's provide a little more of a definition on disability. As you can see by this slide, there was a lot of civil rights movements starting from the 60s. The ones we're going to focus on today, though, are those related to the subject of disability. The Americans with Disability Act was signed into law in 1990, July 26, 1990, and was later amended in 2008. And the major reason for that amendment was to broaden the definition of a disability. A lot of court cases came about after 1990, and a lot of those court cases, there was a lot of narrowing of what a disability was. So it really made it more difficult for someone who was diagnosed with a disability that met the standard for what a disability was to be protected under the law. So that 2008 change made it easier for a person to be protected under the law. When we look at the definition, I want to point out that this is what we call a legal definition as opposed to a medical definition. A lot of times agencies like Social Security Disability, they'll use a medical definition, whereas we're using a legal definition based on these three factors that are written to the left side of the screen. So I'll read through these and explain them a little more. Americans with Disabilities Act defines a person with a disability as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. So now I want to ask for some more interaction. So go ahead and open up your chat. Tell me what a major life activity is. What do you think a major life activity consists of? Wedding. Ooh, that's a major life activity. That's a major life milestone. Working, eating, sleeping, working, parenting, graduating, eating. Yes, I'm seeing a lot of things coming up here related to activities we do every day. Driving, learning, transportation. Thank you. Yep, it's the things we do every day to get through the day. So if one of those has a major impact, it makes a change in your life and it makes things, or it makes you eligible for protection under the ADA laws. The second point underneath the ADA law includes people who have a record or history of an impairment, even if they do not currently have a disability. So this one could be someone who maybe they were diagnosed with cancer and they went through treatment and the treatment worked and now they're in remission. So they no longer exhibit symptoms. Another good example would be someone who maybe is receiving treatment through therapy or medication for depression or anxiety, and they're very stable at the moment. Things are going well. So they're protected by the ADA, even though they may not have any outward signs or any major limitations to life functions at the time. The final point includes individuals who do not have a disability, but are regarded or perceived as having a disability. Now, this one's a little more difficult to understand. So I'd like to lay out an example that kind of explains how this comes into play. The example I use is someone who is working for a manufacturer and they get in a really bad car accident. They have some serious injuries. They go through a lot of treatment. They're through recovery. They return to work, and after returning to work, they apply for a promotion, maybe for a managerial or supervisory position. And the management goes, "Oh, remember he was in a huge accident. I don't know if he could perform the main functions of this job." So they're making an assumption that this person, because of the previous accident they're in, may not be able to perform the primary functions of a job. And that's another good example of someone who would be protected under the ADA. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to define disability a little different way, into two categories. One being visible. Often it's immediately apparent. You see it. It's something you notice right away. It could be anything from someone using a wheelchair, someone using crutches, maybe someone with some type of assistive devices or wearing hearing aids. It's something you see, something you notice. On the other side, we have what's called invisible disabilities, or what's often referred to as a hidden disability. It's not something that you notice, not something you see right away. Could be anything from like congestive heart failure or a respiratory disorder, fibromyalgia. Could be something that you cannot see, but it's still causing an impact on a person's major life activities. So because it's not visible, oftentimes there's a stigma associated with some of these hidden disabilities because people can't see it, they don't understand it. So it creates a difficult challenge for those who have hidden disabilities, because in the reality, a lot of times a disability is difficult for others to recognize or to even acknowledge, that it exists. Next slide. On the screen now, you will see a list of some diagnoses that could be a disability if they meet those, the criteria, specifically if it creates a difficulty, a major impact on a major life activity. So as you look at these diagnoses, and this is not a comprehensive list, it's a pretty good list, but it's not fully comprehensive. Maybe you've thought some of these you may never even thought of as a disability, or maybe you know someone who has one of these listed on this list, or maybe you yourself might have one of these. Remember, 1 in 4 people in the United States have some type of disability at some point in their lives. So even if someone who is dealing with one of these diagnoses has a major impact in their life, a lot of times they still won't say they have a disability. They don't recognize that they have a disability. That's just their life. That's the way they deal with things, but they don't necessarily classify themselves as a person with a disability. I want to bring this back to the person with these diagnoses and ask you about the comfort level of having conversations about limitations related to these diagnoses. How comfortable do you think a person is to go to their supervisor or their boss and talk about the limitations they may have because of a disability that they may have? And then on the other side of it, how comfortable do you think people who are supervising employees are with bringing up the subject of someone's limitations regarding and related to a disability? So it's sometimes a very difficult conversation, and that's one of the reasons we're here today, is just to share some helpful tips and some etiquette to help you with these types of interactions and hopefully help improve communication. I'm going to turn it over to Charlene. Don't forget to take yourself off mute.
Thank you, everybody. I just going to ask for some more interaction here. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I'd like you to use the feature at the top. So there's a reaction button at the top that says send a reaction. So I want you to say thumbs up for true and a surprised face for false. So the question is, when a person avoids eye contact with you in a social setting, it is usually a sign that they are invasive or hiding something. And lots of surprise faces, false. Yeah, so that is good. So avoidance of making or sustaining eye contact could have many different ideas. So yeah, so did somebody want to share why they thought it was
we're on a
false?
meeting, but okay, can you go to you?
Okay, I just muted Kathy. Kathy, did you want to share why you thought you were? Did you want to share your thoughts as to why it was false? No. Okay, I thought maybe she wanted to share. If anybody wants to share why they thought it was false, that's fine. You can. Feel free to put that in the chat or take yourself off mute. I did just mute Kathy for the interruption that she had. But yeah, so while there's no reason to ignore the signs of body language completely, it is, we hesitate to fully rely on them. Yeah, it could be because of a disability. It could be they're shy or they lack confidence. Yes. Thank you, Carmen, for sharing that example. And so we'll go to the next slide. And so this just brings to a point with body language and using that and understanding that aspect. So a lot of times when you're working with a person with a disability who is in need of a sign language interpreter, it is important to still look at the customer that you're talking to make sure that when you're engaging in the conversation, it's the person that that you're talking to, the person that you're serving, is the person that you're going to be interacting with, and making sure that that person is being heard and understood, and being respectful of that, and making sure that you do not direct your attention to the companion or the sign language interpreter, who may also be present. Sometimes it can be distracting, but just speak directly and make sure that your concerns are being addressed to that person. And so we'll go to the next slide. So right now, prior to COVID, we used to talk about shaking hands, and this is looking much different right now, right? Some people are still nervous about shaking hands and what our greetings will look like, and formally shaking hands can be difficult. And so a lot of times when someone wants to shake hands, how do you navigate the situation? Do you feel comfortable mentioning it in public safety and procedures? There's other alternative ways to meet. Some people have been doing like a fist bump, an elbow bump. There's just so many different alternative ways to greet each other. And a lot of times that can affect your body language. So it is important to monitor that, to look at that and read those signs that that person is giving you, to make sure where their comfort level is. So that's just something to be mindful and thinking of when trying to interpret body language and utilizing that in terms of who the person is. So we'll go to the next slide. In terms of a disability etiquette piece is saying what you're seeing. So when you're interacting with a person who has a visible disability, give them the information verbally. So when you're interacting with somebody in that regards, you want to give them the information that is laid out in the room, or what the route is, and making sure that they feel comfortable. If you feel like there's an obstacle in the way, you can ask them, or tell them there's a chair in front of you to your right, to be descriptive, and identify yourself. One example that we like to share is my coworker. She has a manager that she works with that is blind and has a sight dog for her. So they were in the restroom and the dog just got distracted, maybe smelled food down the hall, and just walked out the bathroom. so she didn't know what was going on. So she said, "Hey, just want you to know," and said her name. "Your dog has left. Is it okay? Can I have your permission to go?" Stated her name and said, your dog had went out into the restroom, or went out into the hallway from the restroom. Just I'm gonna come back, but just wanted to let you know that your dog has left. So identifying yourself, what's happening, to just show and indicate what's going on, because a lot of times, they don't know, and it's okay to just relax and just state what's going on, saying what you see, and letting other people know that you're there to assist. So we're going to do another true or false question. So remember, thumbs up for true and surprised for false. So if a person asks for help in filling out paperwork, you should assist the person and not inquire about the nature of the disability. Okay, we've got lots of thumbs up. And the answer is false. I know. Yeah. Isn't that surprising? So a lot of times, if the person is not disclosing that they have a disability and they're not asking for assistance, you don't need to say that. You don't need to inquire about what it is. In terms of a person applying for a job, there's a question on there that will say, do you need or an accommodation that they can, with or without accommodation, can you do this job? Those questions can kind of open up a bag of worms for people. And a lot of businesses have that happening, and it's okay to ask that to an extent, but it has to be focused on the particular job description of what it is that that person's doing. So I know that you guys work at Michigan Works. That's something to think about when you're working with a person, to assist them in the application process, to really look at that position description to see, you know, is this something that they feel like they can do? If they need an accommodation, I'm not here to market working with us, but that is something to be mindful of when moving in that regard.
Charlene, this is Gary.
Yeah.
Harriet King has her hand up.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry, I can't see the chat.
I'm
Sure.
just wondering if you're saying that we should ask them if they have a disability, because a lot of times we work with just elders who might not be computer savvy or people with low literacy, and it seems politer to just help them, period, not ask them what their situation is, unless it relates to how we're helping them with the paperwork.
Okay. Yeah. So in other times, Gary said that he wanted to take this one. Go ahead, Gary.
Well, so the way I explain it is, if somebody asks for help in filling out the paperwork, they're presenting to you that they do have potentially some type of barrier. You can't ask them flat out, what's your disability? You can't ask them flat out, it appears you have a disability, what is it? Again, as Charlene had stated, tie it to what the job description is, right? So you could say to them, you're asking for assistance, help you fill out paperwork, more than happy to help you. Just want you to know, as part of the job description, an essential function of the job is you would have to fill out paperwork daily, do weekly reports, do monthly reports. And I know you've asked for help with filling out the application. Can you tell me how you, or paperwork, can you tell me how you would do that in your daily job with or without a reasonable accommodation? So that allows you to have that conversation about accommodations early in the process, which is way better than waiting till there's been a job offer.
Yeah.
So that's my 2 cents.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Gary. And the other thing too is that when you open up that door for the conversation of like, hey, can I help you? How is this going to affect your assistance with applying for jobs? As opposed to doing it for them, because I mean, our goal, and I'm assuming that Michigan Works has the same goal in helping people finding employment, but the goal is to help them learn these skills and acquire them on their own and ask for accommodation or if they need assistance or help. So then that way they could get that sense of empowerment, because they are there to ask for help. They are there to help to look for employment. And so asking them to get a good understanding of what the position is and what they're looking for to applying can help get you further along in the process, especially. So, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but we have this thing, and sometimes we call it the revolving door. And so, you know, we got one person that comes in, they're good for a little bit, and then they get a job, and then they come back and it's like, well, what in the world? Like, I've helped you. I continuously help you. A lot of times it's because the manager left or, you know, this or that. I mean, that's a whole nother presentation, but did we answer your question? I feel like I could just keep going on and giving you examples.
Yes, it sounds like it's a strategizing thing based on the situation.
Yes. Everything is based on the situation. You are correct, Harriet. And what relationship you have with your customer. You know, everybody is different when it comes to disclosing that they have a disability. And so some people are just very open and honest about it, and they'll just say that, hey, I need this, you know, and that's good. So thank you so much. I like this extra discussion, and I appreciate your confidence and your ability to just take yourself off mute and just ask, because this is the time. So So thank you. We'll go on to the next etiquette tip. And this is that offering assistance. So we kind of discussed that in the last true or false thing. You know, if you offer assistance, wait for the offer to be accepted and then listen or ask for instructions, like what it is that they need, you know. So in this situation, you know, what is it about the application that you need assistance with? You know, is it something of visual nature? Do you need accessibility to type? Or is it, you know, you're not sure if it's the reading of understanding it, the knowledge. So like asking, you know, what is it that you need help with? And then how can I assist you? In the pictures here, it shows a variety of different people trying to access and open doors and, you know, exit and stuff. So doing the same thing there. Can I help you? Can I get that for you? And then wait till it's accepted instead of, you know, just doing it. And, you know, might be feel like the polite thing to do. But it also might be something that they are working on doing to be independent for those independent living skills. And we'll go to the next slide in terms of treating adults as adults. So addressing people with disabilities based on their first name only when extending that familiarity to all others. So this is, you know, you have somebody that starts the job and you heard through the grapevine that Charlie started and Charlie has CP, cerebral palsy, and he, you know, walks a little different. And so then you're in the hallway and you see a gentleman walking a little different and you're like, hey, Charlie, you're extending that familiarity to that person and you were introduced to that person. So how do you know his name's Charlie? It could be somebody else. It could be a customer. So extending that familiarity, you know, just kind of removing your assumptions in that regard from that aspect of feeling like you're familiar with others. And of course, never patronizing people in wheelchairs by patting them on their head or their shoulder. That is an extension of themselves as well. And so make sure that when you're in a situation where there is somebody who is in a wheelchair, to be cognizant of that. And I'm sure this is something that you know, but sometimes, you know, we try to be helpful and we just don't know. So when in doubt, just always just ask and treat others as you would like to be treated, just what you learned in kindergarten, right? And I'll turn it over for the rest of the etiquette to Craig.
Thank you, Charlene. You have the old golden rule, still applies. So the next etiquette point talks about respecting personal space. Charlene had mentioned about someone using a wheelchair. Make sure you don't lean against the wheelchair or hang on the wheelchair. Person using a wheelchair or using some other assistive device, say crutches, they treat that as an extension of their bodies. That's part of them. That's what they use to get through the day, and that's what they need. So we need to respect that. The other side of this slide talks about service animals, and Charlene had mentioned about the service animal that ran out the door. But it's a helpful idea to never try to distract a service animal or to just walk up and start petting a service animal. It's okay to ask the person who's using a service animal, but don't be offended if they say no, because that animal's working. It's providing a service to the person with the disability, and that's its sole purpose at that point, is to help that person. So it's okay to ask, but don't be offended if they say no. Next slide. So another true and false question. If someone has hearing loss, it means they will need an interpreter for the interview, onboarding, and to do their job. Thumbs up for true, surprise face for false. Right, I like this surprise face. Popping up everywhere. Thank you. Yes, the answer is false. Oftentimes, it's a great idea for someone who may be deaf, who has no hearing, who is working with a sign language interpreter, to have an interpreter present for, let's say, the interview, because it's great to have that communication, make sure it's complete, make sure it's completely understood between the interviewer, and the interviewee. But oftentimes after that, it's not always needed. There may be special circumstances where it might be needed, say a staff meeting or training like today where it's needed. But oftentimes there's other forms of communication that can be used, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next couple of slides. But it's refer back to the candidate. You know, what works best for them. Having someone who provides interpretation for that first meeting, great. Maybe they have other forms of communication that will work well in the future, including, you know, some type of written communication, but always defer back to the candidate. So let's go ahead to the next question or next slide, sorry, on the subject of hard of hearing. So on average, it takes about 7 years for someone to finally accept that they have hearing loss and to actually go seek help. I'm somewhere in the middle of that myself right now, but I'm getting closer. So question for everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about the WHO and not the band, not the Pinball Wizard band, but the World Health Organization. They estimate by the year 2050 that there will be over 900 million people with some type of hearing loss. That's 1 in 10 of the population. So why do you think that is? Go ahead and go to your chat and tell me why you think hearing loss seems to be so much more prevalent, and it's growing prevalence. Noise pollution. Great. Thank you, Harriet. Loud work environments. Yes. Thank you, Jen. Constant usage of earbuds and headphones. Madeline, Yvonne, you nailed it. AirPods, Shelly, yes. Lack of ear protection as young. Thank you. Yes, those are all great answers, but the number one answer is related to earbuds. Those are more commonly used, more problems with hearing. Oftentimes, we'll also hear that technology increase. You know, people live longer, more chance of having hearing loss as you age. We also have things like treatments that may cause hearing loss. Example, a gentleman who had cancer went through treatment and cured the cancer, is in remission. However, he has profound hearing loss now. Basically, he said, you know, I'd rather have some problems with hearing than not be here at all. So changes in technology and earbuds, a big impact on hearing. So when you look at this slide, you may recognize some people on this slide. You see Huey Lewis. Huey Lewis in the news. He's been almost deaf in his right ear since the 80s. Might be a little rock and roll, might have caused that one. And then in 2018, he was diagnosed with Meniere's and went almost deaf in his left ear. Whoopi Goldberg has worn 2 hearing aids for years. Rob Lowe is deaf in 1 ear since he was an infant, related to a mumps diagnosis. Halle Berry has 80% loss in her left ear, and Jodie Foster has worn hearing aids for years. So as you can see, it's pretty prevalent already, and to the point where there's many people that are pretty famous people who have or use hearing aids or have some type of hearing loss. It's pretty significant, pretty prevalent. Next slide. So on the subject of hearing loss, we're going to talk a little bit more about communication with someone who has hearing loss. Don't assume that you are heard or understood. There may be times where hearing may be impacted more significantly with someone who has hearing loss. It's okay to restate things a different way. Many times a person may have loss of certain sounds as opposed to just overall loss. And having loss of those certain sounds, maybe saying different words, sometimes may help with the communication. It's also a good idea to have other input when conversing. Could be, an example could be referencing something from a previous meeting that's related to the conversation. Like say, well, I'm referencing the report that we analyzed yesterday, and it helps give a cue. Getting attention before speaking and talk directly to a person. I like to put those two together. It's okay to give someone a wave, hey, or give someone a little tap on the shoulder or their arm. to ensure that they realize that you're ready to talk to them or that you want to talk to them, and then face them directly. They want to be able to have the best mode of communication is face to face. So we want to make sure that we're doing that face to face. Always ask what's the best way to facilitate the conversation. Again, there could be other ways to communicate. Could be written, could be text, could be email, could be other ways that might work more effectively with someone with profound hearing loss. And even after a one-on-one conversation, it might be better to follow up that conversation with a follow-up email that kind of outlines the major points of the conversation to assure that communication was complete. Never shout to a person who has hearing loss. Shouting actually changes the way you say things and could make it more difficult for a person who might be trying to use other cues to understand what you're saying. So never shout, especially if someone who is deaf, they're not going to hear you no matter how loud you shout, but just use a normal tone of voice when communicating. And then most importantly, be patient if responsive slow. Again, person with profound hearing loss may be using other cues and other senses to try to pull that all together before they formulate an answer. So it might take just a little bit longer. So let's make sure there's time to have that conversation. I think one point I forgot to mention was about the location of a communication. Sometimes having that conversation out on the main floor of a factory or the main floor of your business might not be the best place because of background noises. Having that conversation in, let's say, your office or a smaller room might be better for someone who has profound hearing loss. Next slide, please. A drink of water. So listen and be patient. This is referring to someone who may have some difficulties with speech, maybe due to a diagnosis of maybe cerebral palsy, maybe some type of stuttering or aphasia, something that's making it difficult for a person to physically speak. It's always important to make sure that you listen attentively and allow the person the time they need to have that conversation. It may take a little bit longer, so dedicate some extra time to having that conversation. If necessary, try to formulate any questions you may have so that they can be a simple yes or no answer or a nod of the head, make it easier for communication. But most importantly, never pretend to understand. Always make sure that you ask for someone to repeat or to say in a different way, or possibly even use another form of communication, just like with hearing loss. Another form of communication could be texting or emailing or written. Just make sure you use something that's going to work best for the person and ask the person. It's okay to ask what's the best way for us to communicate. But again, never just pretend you understand. A person who has difficulty with speech gets it. Oftentimes they've dealt with it for most of their lives. They know that sometimes they're hard to understand, and they're not going to be offended if you ask, is there another way we can communicate this, or is there another way to say this? So, next slide. So most importantly, after all these etiquette cues and etiquette examples, just relax. We're all people. We're just trying to communicate and get through every day. Just relax in your communications. Don't depend on lots of rules of engagement. Just relax, just be yourselves. And don't be afraid to use common expressions like see you later or walk in or did you hear about this or something that you think might be related to their disability. It's okay. Common expressions are okay. I want to lay out an example of this through a story. We've done a lot of work over the years with previous Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley and State Supreme Court Justice Richard Bernstein. And for those of you who do not know, Supreme Court Justice Bernstein is blind, and between him and Lieutenant Governor Calley, we did a lot of work with them on raising disability awareness to our local businesses in Michigan, and had a lot of different interactions with them over the years. Well, Calley went in one time to meet with Bernstein and walked in and went up, shook his hand, and and said, Justice Bernstein, it's good to see you again. And as soon as it came out of his mouth or in his head, he's like, why did I say that? I probably just offended the guy. Why did I have to say that? Oh my goodness. So this weighed on him the whole time during this meeting he was having with Justice Bernstein. And the meeting ended, and Callie went up to Bernstein and said, you know what? I got to say, this is weighing on me. I'm sorry that when I walked in the room, I said it was nice to see you. I hope I didn't offend you. And Justice Bernstein was smiling and said, no, don't worry about it. He goes, I use the same expression all the time. It's okay. So feel free to use those expressions. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Charlene. We've got another question coming up, another poll.
Yeah, so thank you so much for that. And I have a counselor that I work with who is deaf, and we always talk about, well, did you hear about that policy? And he's like, no, I didn't hear about that. What's going on? And so for sure, just relax about that. So this last half is just going to talk to you real briefly about reasonable accommodation. So true or false, thumbs up for true, shocked face for false. So developing reasonable accommodations for mental illness is difficult for employers because of the lack of understanding concerning disabilities. Okay. We've got a lot of thumbs up. And the answer is false. I know, that's kind of shocking, isn't it? I think these questions are designed to stump you. So remember, there are a lot of different people with various concerns, various disabilities that they don't always disclose. There's multiple strategies that have been developed for accommodating people with disabilities, including those with mental illnesses. Also remember that the number 1 and number 2 prescribed medications covered by health insurance are those that are to treat anxiety and depression, even more so since COVID. A lot of that stuff is increasing. So, so it's difficult in that regard, but it's really, sometimes it's not, because a lot of times people have been understanding that anxiety, and a lot of things have changed since COVID, and a lot of our customers are benefiting from that. So I'm just going to talk to you briefly. So we're going to go to the next slide right now. I understand that we've got 10 minutes, so I want to be able to cover all the information in reference to reasonable accommodations and what that might look like, and what it means. So what accommodation looks like is it's allowing underneath it's a protection under the Americans with Disabilities Act, that's the ADA. So adjustments to the job application process, modification to the physical worker or environment. So that's really looking at those essential functions. Remember how we talked about that? That's why that's important. That's why businesses need to update their job descriptions. They can't be using the same one that they had in the 90s or, the early 2000s, right? Because we base those on reasonable accommodations and so then that way people can have access to them. So modifications to the physical work and the environment, the way that they do the job, what is the purpose of it? It's not what's to be done, not necessarily to how that gets, it's not supposed to affect the quality of it, but it's what needs to be done. And looking at that, a lot of position descriptions say lift 10 pounds, lift 50 pounds. Is that necessary? Can they move it, right? Because if we're looking at something and we see a person that can't they can't lift over, 25 pounds, can they move it with something else? So really looking at that, modifying the way that the work is done is what that means. So just in this, making sure that the employee with a disability can enjoy all the other benefits and privileges. So making sure that if there's a Christmas party and somebody who is deaf and needs a interpreter, make sure that you have an interpreter for the event so that way they can communicate. And the other thing though to be mindful of is that if businesses with 15 or more employees must legally provide this reasonable accommodation unless they can say it's an undue hardship. Undue hardship is another topic that we could discuss at length. So I'm going to move on to the next slide for the case of time. So here's some accommodations examples. So modifying and providing the assistive technology. So one thing to think of and with assistive technology is making sure that there's readers and making sure that everybody can participate. A lot of this stuff is accessible to us. So I know that when we started, Tom talked about making sure to keep your microphone muted. And so a lot of times at MRS, when we do presentations, we have people go up to the top of Teams. There's a little button there that says more, and you can go scroll down into there, and you can do that right now if you want, and go to CC for closed captioning. And so when you do that, you can have it like the words printed out for you. So that's just an easy accessibility feature, easy assistive technology. And the other way to do is just modifying test and training materials. And that could be allowing them to have extra time, allowing it in a different format. So this presentation right now is being recorded. So maybe I talk too fast. I tend to talk too fast. And so maybe it might be something that somebody can't understand or keep up with all the words and are distracted maybe by my hands, or maybe they have ADD and they can't focus on this presentation, right? So having it recorded and having the people be able to view this at another time. So that's just one way to adjust your training materials. I actually worked with a business in their online training program. They had it recorded, so then that way the person or the businesses, if somebody had a reading disability or were cognitively impaired, they had it available for somebody in video. And so when we were looking at their hiring processes, we thought, kudos, that's great, because sometimes people just need to look back and review it. But the other thing too is that it didn't have the closed captioning feature. So now they're missing out on some talent in that regards. So adding that piece to it, acquiring or modifying some of the equipment, that could be easy as raising a lift. So we have occupational therapists. I guess that's a shameless plug in that regards. So when we go out to a business and we're just touring around thinking of disability, and that's kind of what our niche is, right? And we see a lot of people bending over and doing that kind of stuff. I went to a business and they had all these racks, and they had they were like pallets, so to speak, and they had materials on them. And so they were constantly bending over and moving it over to another side. And I was like, hey, does that ever move? What is that? And how is that position there? Is that position always available? And they're like, yeah, a lot of times people move from there to another one, and because it's just really physically labor intensive. And so I was like, yeah, I wonder if you just add some other pallets underneath there to raise it so the people just aren't consistently bending over. So it's just another way of restructuring and modifying. The other one is just modifying work schedules in places where a person is. Remote work, hybrid work, a lot of that stuff is going on. COVID has introduced that flexibility, thankfully, in that regard. So these are just some ideas. We'll go to the next slide. If you have questions about that, please put it in the chat if you wanted to discuss a little bit more. Right now, and we'll send this video. We had a video too, but I want to be mindful of everybody's time, so we can send that to you later. This right here is our business network division. We have a bunch of different resources all across the counties. And we all were rehabilitation counselors before we became business relations consultants. And so we work along a team of occupational therapists. I've talked to you about that. And I know that Michigan Works has that certified business solutions professionals. We have gone through that. And so we can speak that language. We can learn to stay in our lane. Sometimes I'll admit I swerve over the road a little bit, but I get back on track and try to if I swerve in the lane and hit you, I'm usually wanting you to come along with me. So that's what we're here to do. We also work with our sister agency, which is BSBP, the Brewer Services for Blind Persons. We have a school there. We also have our own school, Michigan Career Technical Institute, has 13 different trades. Some of them are touch and go because of COVID, right? And sometimes the school ends up getting COVID, some people get there. So we have some departments. I mean, it's what it is right now, but we're in this together, right? That's what we have to keep saying. We're in this together. So the next slide, I'll just talk about a few resources. If you want to learn more information about MRS, please feel free to reach out to either one of us on this call. Roy is on here. He is the manager up in the UP. And myself and Craig and Gary, we are the business relations consultants. We are here to assist. And Ask Jan. This is like one of the great websites that I like to go to. So if you have a person that doesn't like to ask for help, because not a lot of people like to ask for help, right? So if you have one of those people, maybe you yourself might have a difficulty staying focused, staying concentrated. How do you do that? And you don't really want to go to somebody and you're a little nervous to ask us, you can go to Ask Jan. You can have your customers go to Ask Jan and type in what the limitation is, what they're experiencing. And you can even type in like what type of job it is that you're trying to look for in terms of going forward to ask for an accommodation. It will send you a link straight to Amazon. I am not kidding, to give you an idea of what might help. There's PEACH, the Partnerships with Employer Accessibility Technology, to get information from there. EARN is another great business for employers. The EEOC, the Great Lakes ADA, you can see all those accessible to you. And if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And we'll go to the next slide with our contact information. And if I forgot anything, I know we kind of rushed here at the end. Please let me know, Craig or Gary or Roy.
No, yeah, you covered it well. Thank you, Charlene. We're here for the last couple minutes to answer any questions you may have or any other input, feedback. We'll be sending a survey link. If I had it ready, I'd put it in the chat right now.
Yeah.
But I will send it. I'll send it out in the email with the recording and with another video that's on the subject of disability, a really short, brief video. But we thank you for coming today. Again, the floor is back to you, Tom, and your group if you have any questions right now.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for the wonderful presentation. Craig, Charlene, Gary, all of you guys over there at MRS, we really appreciate it. This has been incredible information. We'll keep our eyes peeled for those resources from you, the recording, the video, survey link, all of that. If anybody has any questions, feel free to pop off mute here. We have 2 minutes left, or you can put it in the chat. Give you a little bit here.
There was something in the chat that said, remember to arrange for a sign language interpreters well in advance. So that is a good reminder. So thank you for putting that in there. There is an accessibility tax feature credit too that there's one designed for barrier removal and then also one for expenses such as that. So for any of you, if you have any BSRs that are on the business solutions reps, I think is what BSR stands for, right? So just knowing that resource is there, but feel free to connect them to us if a business has to pay for that. And then being mindful of that for any job fairs or virtual settings that you guys have that we're a resource to you.
Thank you so much for that information. And it doesn't look like we have any additional. Oh, we got one question here in the chat, actually, from Kathy. Is it okay to raise your voice with a hearing impaired person if they ask you to speak up?
Yes, that's the same as asking what's the best way to communicate. It's going to be different for everyone, but if they specifically give you that advice or that ask, then yes.
Yes. Yeah. Another thing to think of is how they want to get your attention. Asking them is it okay? So Todd, he's a counselor here. He works with all of our deaf population in West Michigan in the schools, very well-known counselor, and speaks a lot about deaf culture. And one of the things that he's always said is, the best way to get my attention is to just touch the back of my shoulder. So if so how they want to get attention, some people want you to stand in front of them to get the attention because they don't want to be touched from the back because that might scare them, right? So it's important to ask, how is it for me? What is most appropriate for me to get your attention in reference in just a setting? So for Todd, we all know it's okay to touch the back of his shoulder. That's how he would like to. But some people want to see you in the front as opposed to touching somebody from the behind. Some people like the elbow. I know we have a counselor here that is blind, and she prefers people to touch her elbow. So it's just a matter of just asking them and being comfortable with it. Hey, I want to make sure that I am interacting with you and helping you the best that I can. What is the best way for me to get your attention and to assist you? Because I'm here to help. That's how you would word that. And a lot of times they'll just tell you because they know themselves the most. Just like you, right? They're just like us. I know myself best. And you know yourself best. So we appreciate you guys having us and helping this. Hopefully these ideas in this conversation can help you be your best and assisting and working with others with disabilities. And we appreciate you hearing and staying on for this message.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks again.
Yes, all righty. Well, everybody, I hope you have a great rest of the day. It was good to see you. And until next time.
All right. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye. Thank you, Harriet, for your input and popping off there. That was nice.